Okay. I'm going to use a worksheet that we didn't end up looking at in the skills assessment file, the same Excel document that has the buff and tough gym data in it. There was a worksheet called September data that I normally use to cover charts. And so I'm going to leverage this data to just cover a few things that might come up in your MOS exam next week. This is some sort of movie rental store, which they don't typically exist anymore. Obviously, Blockbuster Video was the largest movie rental chain in Western Europe and North America. And now most, or if not all, of those stores have closed and they've been supplanted by Netflix and the like. But this is that kind of data. And so it catalogs the genres of the movies that they would rent, and then the rental sales across a month. So very simple data. I'm going to show you a couple of things. We'll turn some of this data into a full chart and then look at some chart options like data tables, how to apply different chart layouts, how to apply trend lines in case that comes up as a question in your MOS exam, how to move a chart to its own worksheet, although you should all know how to do that by now already. But I'm going to start with SPARKLINES. SPARKLINES are very likely to come up in your MOS exam. And there's a couple of options that they might ask you to enable. And so I'll cover those quite quickly. I'm going to put the SPARKLINES, which are just little charts that live in cells, in column G, in this range, right here. Now, it's not really going to be helpful to include the totals in this range. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to remove the row totals and the column totals. That leaves only the individual sales amounts by week for each of the genres. And those are the values that we would want to include. When you're building charts or SPARKLINES, you don't want to include totals along with the individual values that create the totals, that generate the totals. You can do totals only, so we could have done the genres and the totals, the column totals, or rather the row totals, that I deleted from column F. But you wouldn't want to include columns B through column F. So the values and the totals, because you end up with duplicated data, doubles the amount of data that you're looking at. The totals include all of the original source values. So I've removed them just for simplicity's sake. So we're looking at time-based data, 4 weeks worth of data. I'm going to click in cell F5 and I'm going to build a little SPARKLINE chart in cell F5 that shows me these values in row 5 for the action and adventure genre as a line chart in a single cell. And so what we should expect to see, if you look at the values, is that week 1, it's at its lowest point, and then it goes up to its highest point, and then it comes down across the final 2 weeks. So we'll see it start low, it'll go high, and then it'll come down gradually. In the next row for animation, these values will start high and then just get smaller. So they're going to start high at the top of the cell, and then they're just going to gradually get smaller. It's going to be an angled slope downwards. Do we have any that actually go up? Yeah, so the foreign films will start not at the lowest point, because week 3 is the least sales, but it's going to start fairly low in the cell, like here, not in the middle, but in like somewhere here, and then it's going to go up almost to the top of the cell. Then it's going to come low to the bottom of the cell, because that's its lowest point. Then it's going to go right up to the top of the cell, because then we end up with 132, which is the highest point. And what I'll do is I'll duplicate these values, so these are all the same. That should just give us a straight line, because they're all the same number. So I'm going to click in cell F5. I'm going to go to the Insert tab, and to the right of the charts group, there's a group called Sparklines. And you might be asked to build line sparklines or column sparklines in your MOS exam. They effectively do exactly the same thing. They draw to a point in the cell. And so I'll do them as 2 different columns. I'll do column sparklines in column G, and you can compare them to the line sparklines, but they will show exactly the same data. They'll show exactly the same pattern of data, the same movement, irrespective of which one of these you pick. I'm going to do line sparklines because it's the most obvious over time. And it also allows me to show you 1 or 2 other elements that might come up in your MOS exam as far as sparklines are concerned. And it wants to know what data I want to include in this sparkline. And like a formula, we can build these in the first row and then copy them down. So in the first week, in the first genre, in this row 5, I want to include B5 through E5. Those are the values that are going to be populated in that cell. And I'm going to leave that reference relative so that it can be copied down. So then the selection that I've made moves down by 1 row each time the formula gets copied down by. So it just shows us this. It starts off at its lowest point at the very bottom of the cell, jumps right up to its highest point at the very top of the cell, and then starts to come down gradually. If I copy these down to the bottom in row 2 for the animation genre, you can see it starts off at its highest point at the very top of the cell, and then it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it reaches its lowest point at the very bottom of the cell. The musical genre, where I made every value the same across the 4 weeks, that just shows us a straight line. All right, easy enough. Sparklines, really useful to show trends of data over time. The more values you include, the more difficult they are to read. This is just 4 weeks, so it's quite easy. Where you've got distinct values, like for the foreign films, you can see all 4 data points are being plotted. It's like there's 4 dots and they're just joined. For the drama series here, if you zoomed out, you could mistake this for a straight line. You could mistake this for just 3 data points, but there's actually a 4th one right here. It's just so close, it's gradual. And obviously the straight line here, this looks like there's just 2 data points, one in week 1 and one in week 4. It's really difficult to figure out what the values for week 2 and week 3 are going to be, but they exist. With the sparkline selected, just like if you had a chart selected, you're going to get a sparkline tab in the ribbon. You only get 1 tab because there's not a lot of options that you can actually apply to them. But this group, where it says show, and then you've got high point, low point, negative points, markers, and then the style group, where you can pick different colors of sparklines to draw in the cell. And then you've got this option for the marker color. We don't have markers applied, so it wouldn't do anything right now. In the MOS exam, they might ask you to insert sparklines into some cells, turn on either the high point marker. So in the show group, if I check this box for high point, it puts like a diamond shaped dot. in the week in this case, because we're looking at 4 weeks worth of data, where the most rentals occurred, where they made the most money, which is quite useful. And then you could come to marker color and say that you want to change the high point marker to, let's say, disgusting yellow, and that's what it does. Let's turn it back to something else because it's hideous. Or they might ask you instead to just turn on all markers, which is going to give you all 4 diamond-shaped markers to show you each week, the data point for each week. And then you could still come in here and customize the first point, the last point, high point, low point. You could change all the marker colors in there. And that's it. Like, it's not going to be any more complicated than that. I'm going to do the same thing, but with column sparklines, so you can see the difference. It's the same tool. You treat it exactly the same way. And this is what it effectively shows us. It shows us exactly the same thing. And irritatingly, unlike a regular chart, when you're working with sparklines, you can't compare across rows. The extent to which it draws the bar for the column sparklines, or the point at which it draws the line in the line sparklines within the cell, is dictated by the values that generate the sparkline. But they can't be compared against other rows of sparklines. And so if you look at the action and adventure series at the top, where the values are in thousands, and then we look at these sparklines where the values are just over 100, and 115 is the highest number of sales in the horror genre across this month. The largest value, so 115 in this row and 1625 in the first row, they're drawn to the same point in the cell. The bars are exactly as big as one another. The marker for the high point in that row is drawn at the very top of the cell. The smallest value in that range is drawn at the very bottom of the cell, like this, despite the fact that the series of values in the action and adventure genre at the top are significantly bigger. And so that it's relative to the values that generate that individual sparkline only. It's not relative to the group. So you can't compare them against each other, but they're good for showing trends of data over time, especially over time, with time-based data. So these show exactly the same thing. The line that's here where all the values are identical, it just draws a straight line at the top of the cell, and the bars are all drawn to the top of the cell. If you do look at column sparklines, if you look at the one where it starts off high and then just gradually gets smaller as the month goes on, we start off with a value of 900 in week 1, 700 in week 2, 500 in week 3, and 300 in week 4. That just gives us a straight line that is angled downwards. So the trend is it's descending. If you look at the column sparklines for that data, they just get smaller by the same amount. It just gives us a diagonal line that goes downwards, that decreases over time. So they draw identically in terms of what they're doing with the data. The pattern is 100% the same. You can almost imagine that at the top of each one of these bars, there's a marker. And if you joined them as a dot with a line, you joined those markers, you would effectively just have the line sparklines. So sparklines, quite useful for evaluating simple data like this. There's plenty of scope to use sparklines in the capstone, and they might come up in your MOS exam, but they're really easy to work with. I'm going to create let's use the animation data and the genres in the week. So I need these as my headings, and then I'm going to take the animation data as well. I'm going to turn it into a proper chart. It's going to give us a chart that looks like this column sparkline, because the values are going to start big and then get smaller over time. But that's good because it allows me, we'll pick this one, it allows me to show trend lines. So this is the same data visualized, but in a full chart. And so the default chart setting, I have a y-axis that is the number of sales. I've got an x-axis that shows me the genre. And then I've got my weekly data points in the legend. Each bar represents a different week of data. And then we get a preset text box in our chart for a title to be entered. It's entirely possible that they're going to ask you to either generate a chart in the MOS exam or manipulate a chart that already exists. And there's a couple of different things that they could ask you to do with the chart. The most obvious ones are, if you select the chart and then go to the chart design tab, to apply a chart style, right? And then you got to hover over to see the screen tip for the style name, but they're just numbered. And so even if the screen tip doesn't show up, you should still be able to identify which number it is. They might get you to change the chart type. So with the chart selected in the chart design tab, you can say, I want to change the type of the chart and come back into the menu. So I want to see it as a pie chart instead. They might ask you to change the layout of the chart, which is not the style of the chart. The style of the chart is all of the same elements. So it doesn't add any elements. It doesn't modify any of the elements in the chart. It just changes the visual appearance of the chart and those elements. They might ask you to do a layout, which would change the elements that are being used in the chart and the arrangement of those elements. So if I hover over some of these, you can see different things are being added in. So this one, which is layout 5, includes an axis title text box on the left-hand side to the left of the sales values, which didn't exist before. And it's rotated because it's an axis title. And it also includes a data table underneath the bars. So it includes the actual numbers that generate the bars in this column chart. So they might want you to apply a chart layout. They might also want you to, rather than apply a layout, to add something like a value axis title. And you can do that 2 ways. You can either come to the chart design tab and go into this add chart elements drop-down menu, or you can do it from the chart that you've got selected. This plus button will give you access to the same options. If I wanted, without applying a different layout to the chart, if I just wanted to add an axis title, and I wanted a vertical axis title, I would expand this menu, come to axis titles and expand it, and then just say primary vertical. And then it would give me that axis title on the left-hand side. If I wanted, without applying a layout to the chart, to include a data table, I would do the same thing. I would expand this menu and I would say, give me a data table. And then you can either have it with legend keys or with no legend keys. That includes the data table underneath our values. There's a chance that they're going to ask you to insert data labels, which displays the value that draws the bar in a text box, either inside the bar or outside the bar. There's a couple of different locations that we could put it. This menu can also be expanded to say, draw the value within the bar, so in the center of it. within it, but at the end, so at the top. Inside base, we draw it within the bar, but at the bottom. Outside end, we'll draw it at the very top, but outside of the bar, which is arguably the best place to put it in most cases. Or you could have it as a data call out, and then these can be dragged and moved. So if you were to apply this, then you could click this and drag it up, and it will maintain its point of contact. I'm a big fan personally of outside end. Outside end, not data called out. Hang on. Are they being drawn? We delete them. Charts can be funny. Deselect the chart, reselect the chart. Data labels, outside end. Now it's just turning them into data callouts, which is annoying. All right, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to turn them off actually for now. The only other option that they might ask you to include in a chart is a trend line, which shows the direction that the data is moving in over time. So it's only something that you would use typically with time-based data, which we have. We've got 4 weeks worth of data, and so you expand this menu and then turn on a trend line. There's a couple of different options that you could turn on. In the MOS exam, it would very likely be a linear trend line that they want you to that they want you to include, and it would just draw a line across the pattern of the data. Other than that, maybe they would want you to move a chart to its own worksheet, which you could do in the chart design tab. In the location group, there is a move chart button. Or you could do it on a right click and say, I want to move this chart to its own worksheet. Say new sheet, puts it in its own worksheet. That's going to be it. There isn't going to be anything else in the MOS exam. For your capstone, perhaps you want to bank some additional marks by manipulating specific elements within your chart, which I've seen some people do when I've looked at the capstones this week. Some people have made really good choices. Some people have made choices that I wouldn't have made, but they'll still get the marks for. This is our y-axis values, and our increments are 100. So the values ascend in increments of 100. If I wanted to format these values or the appearance of this element, you would select it and then right click it and say format this axis. And you could come in here and say the major units, which are now currently 100, you could change that. You could say I would like it to be 50 instead, and then they ascend in increments of 50. You could have it display different units, and so these are just going to be hundreds. So if I say hundreds, it's going to insert the word hundreds right here. It's going to say that this axis is measured in hundreds, but now that I've done that, some of them look like they're duplicated. It doesn't work perfectly because our major unit is 50, so it almost skips them. It's like rounding down with decimal values. But if you had the data to support it, maybe it would make sense. That's going to be it. They're not going to get you to do anything else with charts and the MOS exam. It'll be fairly straightforward. It's either going to be turn data into a chart, manipulate an existing chart, add an element to the chart, like a value access label or a data table or data labels, or move a chart. Change the layout of a chart, change the chart style. They're not going to get you to do anything else. Okay.